Welcome to Cartoon Creators, where we talk to the minds behind the shows that raised us. I'm your host, Tamar Lilienthal, and today we're talking to Angela Santomero, one of the creators of Blue's Clues. She's also the creator of Super Why and more recent properties like Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, Wish and Poof, and Charlie's Colorform City. In this episode, we talk about, well, Blue's Clues, of course, and how her research roots helped make that show and countless others a success. We also chat about her experience as a female creator, executive producer, and entrepreneur. And I ask Angela about her decision to not only talk to kids, but also to their parents through her books, social media accounts, and more. Let's get to the episode. So, Angela, thank you so much for joining us today. This is incredibly exciting. I'm really excited to have you on.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited by your podcast.
Thanks. So I usually start most of our episodes just asking folks about their story. I've learned that everyone has an entirely different, often a very unique way they ended up in this industry. So what's your story? How did you end up in kids TV?
Well, I always say that I came through the side entrance, I guess, to kids TV because I started as a child development person, psychology, studying kids and research. And
Hmm.
so I had started as an intern actually for a preschool show. And then they introduced me to the research department over at Nickelodeon. And I fell in love with that process of asking kids what they think. Since I was such a kid advocate, I had been a preschool teacher, assistant teacher in college, and had always studied kids. And so from there at Nickelodeon, I was able to meet with a bunch of different people and understand the business of making kids TV and what they were looking for. And because I'm a preschool person, I started to zero in on that space. And Nick Jr. was just starting to be a network, its own network and
Mm,
its own thing. So I came in through there, starting to give notes, and I had my master's in child development and started to be invited to meetings, and so things kind of started to grow from there.
wow, wow. No, that's awesome. And also I know that Nick Jr. or Nickelodeon in general really, I feel like pioneered that sort of like research-based you know, kids TV model in some ways. So it's awesome that you were a part of that.
Yes, I mean, I think Sesame Street definitely did it from the beginning as a formative research thing where they
Mm,
would bring advisors in at the table with producers and writers. And then Nickelodeon, because Jerry Laybourne, who started Nickelodeon as the president, was a teacher, she believed in getting responses almost more a little bit on the marketing side to find out what
mm.
show should be picked up. And then we took that as the research department and started to dive in more to answer business questions and to really understand because of my dream of educational TV. I really wanted to dive in and understand what kids were learning and what they loved and why. So that started the formative research part of what we were doing.
That's awesome. I didn't know a lot of that. So that's really interesting. And so as I was coming up with like what I wanted to talk about today, I was thinking like there's obviously, a lot about you, a lot of stuff that you've done sort of online. And obviously you're super known for being the creator, co-creator of Blue's Clues, something that obviously was incredibly successful. Um, Continues to be, has been, spun off, if that's even a word. Um, but nonetheless, so I was curious. I was like, how do I attack this from a different angle? Um, I was wondering if you talk about like kind of a difficulty or a challenge or something that didn't, initially work in that Blue's Clues process, and maybe what you learned about, a story maybe that we wouldn't know from just reading all of the obvious evident successes.
That's so funny. I do agree with that angle, I have to say, because nothing, of course, is easy and nothing, we've had so many bumps along the way. And really, that idea of perseverance and to learn from your failures is all true, right? In terms of it really challenges you to say, do I love this enough to keep going?
Totally.
So So yes, I mean, I think everything from the process of getting something picked up and the process of creating something and being within that whole world was fascinating. But I was learning as I was doing it, right? So there were a lot of this
Mm.
isn't going to happen. There was a lot of it's one thing to create to write something. Let's see if you can actually produce it. It's one thing to produce something. Let's see if you can actually make a series. There was a lot of hoops that we consistently jumped through as a really young team. And it was in that sense of stopping and starting. Like, are we going to be able to be funded with the budget, with getting the people that we need in order to make Blue's Clues? And we were so young and so green that we, again, were learning as we were going, but we were asking all those right questions. And I think because of the stops and starts, it made us really dig in and do our own research and understand everything that we needed to understand in order to make the show. So how would you do a green screen shoot with, 2D animation and a live action host? How do you zero in to find that right actor or actress to play that part? Like, how do you know what I mean? There were so many things that we had to really learn and dive into. And there were a lot of mistakes. Like there was one time, so again, Nickelodeon loves research. And so they have a space that you can use that's a one-way mirror within the building. And so
Oh,
so it's like, oh, that's really cool. Like you can use it. You don't have to go into the classroom or do anything. You can literally use this space. And so we had filmed our PA doing some of the host kind of duties. And then we also had a clip of Steve doing his auditioning thing. So there was very flip-flopped, right? There was a lot going on there, but we just wanted to test how the gameplay was working. And as we're testing it and we're on the floor with kids and we're watching, Jerry Laybourne, the president of the company, walks in and sits on the other side of the mirror and she's watching what's going on. And she turns around and I don't think she knew who I was. She looked at me and she goes, "This is clearly not working. This is awful. They hate it." And I was like, "Oh, we're
oh
never gonna
man.
get picked up. This is awful." But we we used
Wow.
research to figure out what the problems were so that we could fix them. So yeah, so like there were
Mm-hmm.
definitely a lot of things that we had to continue to work on to make it, to actually when it finally got on TV to know that it was actually going to work.
That wow, yeah. That's quite the story, and I think that that's always kind of good to it's always kind of nice to hear, kind of what other people went through early on in their careers or sort of continue to go through because I get the sense I wouldn't really know, but I get the sense that it's still not easy to get something picked up and the hoops are always plentiful. So
Yeah, I don't think
that's
it
yeah.
matters how much you've done. I really don't. I do think that it's only, you're judged on your last idea or what you're walking into. And I do think it's a difficult space to begin with,
Yeah,
obviously in terms
yeah.
of we only go into it because we love it so much. But yeah, I think it's hard. Yeah, it's definitely hard for everybody.
And I kind of want to ask you as well. You mentioned particularly when you were working on Blue's Clues, being very young, being very sort of green in a sense, the whole team sort of. Um, I'm also curious. I've spoken a little bit to Jill Kaza Turner about this, a little bit to Susan Kim as well. Um, what was it like for you being a woman in the industry in the 90s and early 2000s, eventually starting your own company? I mean, people often, at least in my circles, kind of assume that kids media and educational media specifically like has always been a female dominated field. I think because they associate it with like teaching and education and that has its own stereotypes, but I'm like, no, definitely not. So I'm curious what that was like for you.
Oh my gosh, I feel like this could be its own podcast, but yes, it's quite the experience to be a woman in this industry, and definitely in the 90s. There's so many stories there that we can get into, but I would say that, there were a lot of women and powerful women working at Nickelodeon at the time. And so there were a lot of decisions that could get made in the bathroom, and there was a lot of
Mm-hmm.
that kind of inner circle that you would want to kind of be around and do, which I think again, like not being in the office all the time and having hybrid, I think you do miss a lot of that learning by absorbing people around you and running into people who will say amazing things that you'll remember forever. But there's also a glass ceiling because the people that were making the decisions above us were all men, and so there was definitely a
Hmm.
glass ceiling. There was definitely a different way that we had to go about things, in my opinion. And from a lot of the colleagues that, we have talked about this, there are a lot of things that we, again, had to just figure out how to get past and to live with and to jump over, right? So Tracy and I were both new. We again had like 8 years in the industry, absorbing and learning and writing and researching and all of that
Right.
level of expertise. But in terms of creating a show, it was like we had all of that foundation to then use to jump from, right? To say, okay, I'm going to take this risk and I'm going to learn and create and, dig in to do it. But we had to be paired with somebody who was twice our age, who was, a man who had not necessarily created a show before, but had produced and directed in a different way than Tracy and I had. And so again, like it was one of those things that we had to be, I don't want to say babysat, but there was a sense that you had to have that legitimacy at the time. And there were a lot more, that came with that in terms of what what we were allowed to make, what our deals looked like versus everybody else, like all of those kinds of things. We could go on and on with those kinds of stories, but the positive is I think that we were resilient and persistent and creative about the way in which we wanted to create a beautiful space for 80 of us full time for 10 years. And we did that, right? We loved every second of it, even the hard parts.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
so, I think it's just that testament of, yeah, we went through what we went through, all of us. And I don't think we really felt it until after it was all over.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Hmm.
For sure. When you're in it, you're just kind of like focused on the end
Yeah.
goal, but then yeah,
Yep.
no, totally. That's super interesting. That's yeah, I can imagine that that was an interesting time.
Hmm.
And so, how did you then go? I believe if I have this correct, like how did you then go from Blue's Clues to Super Y, or was there overlap there?
Hmm. So we had done a pilot for Nickelodeon and it was too educational. It was interactive. This was before Dora. So, the idea that we would do another interactive show, the network was just like, what are we going to do? Be known for that? And I was like, yeah, we could be known for that. I don't think that's a bad thing.
Why
But
not? Yeah.
why not? So it was a pilot that we had done that didn't go um, with Nickelodeon. And so we had a friend who was running PBS now that came from Nickelodeon, Linda Semensky, who's an
Yes.
advocate and brilliant and mentor. And I bow down to her. She was
Same.
at PBS. Yeah, right? We all do. She was at PBS and she said, I'm looking for a literacy show. And I said, oh, I have one, but at this point I was so upset that Blue's Clues was ending that I just kind of handed it to her and she was like, okay, like, do you want to read it? And I was like, no, we've been through this, da 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 da. Let's see what you think. Obviously, I had read it and we had made a pilot. So it was a full on pitch, it was a
Right,
big,
right.
all of it was there. And so she was interested in it. But in order to do a show for PBS, you have to find 2/3 of the funding. And so I needed a company and I wanted to own the show, like there were all those things that I wanted to try to do with the team that we had post Blue's Clues that would get me excited to do it. And so Super Y took a long time. I would say it took almost 8 months to a year after Blue's Clues ended, and a lot of hoops again there. But the idea to get that call that they were picking up 65 episodes of this
Oh,
series,
wow.
I was like, all
Wow.
right, we can do this. Not a one hit wonder. Here we go.
No, for sure. Whew. That is so cool. And so I actually think so Linda was my professor in college and she's someone who I really admire, is like my biggest mentor, has just helped me so much. And I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, that she told me back when I was in school that Super Y was sort of like based off of a grad school thesis of yours or something. Would that be accurate?
Yes, and I love that Linda. Of course, Linda was your professor and mentor. I don't
Yes,
know
no,
why I didn't
she's
make that connection. That's amazing. But
she's
yeah,
wonderful.
it was my master's thesis, and I worked
Wow.
with Rosemary Trulio, who's the head of research for Sesame, but she wasn't at the time. She was a professor at teachers college. And so I tracked her down to do, and I was working at Nickelodeon while I was finishing my master's, and I tracked her down to do a one-on-one kind of, what is that called? The independent seminar, what, why am
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah,
kidding? You
like an
know what I mean?
independent study. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
thank
yeah.
you. And she's like, well, I'll do it, but we need three people. And I was like, fine. I rounded up two other people. We all kind of got in there. And then one by one, they all left. And it was literally just me and Rosemary. And I learned
Oh,
everything I feel like I needed to know from her. And part of my master's thesis was create a show, take everything that you know and everything that you want to do for kids and put it into a project. And so I did it as the beginnings of what would become Super Why, because I was such a reader and so knew that kids who were watching TV, watching media weren't reading. And how could you bridge that gap? And so Super Why was the answer to that for me.
that's awesome. And by the way, thank you for paving the way for the rest of us because when I was in my senior year of my undergrad, I said, I want to, make a show as my senior thesis, and I want Linda to be my advisor. And the department was, I think, initially less than thrilled about my proposal, but between my pushing and her pushing, I was able to do just that. So
I think
very,
it's a great
very
use
cool.
of our time in
I mean,
school.
for sure, for sure. I remember them telling me something about, technically that your thesis advisor had to have a PhD, and I don't believe Linda Sametsky does. And I
Mm,
said, the problem is that she is the only person that I'd like to work with. And this is the
hmm.
only thing that I want to do as my senior thesis. So how can we circumvent this a little bit and figure out a way to make it work? So, you know,
I
um,
love
I,
that. I love that you don't take no for an answer. That's,
I
that's what you
try, I
need.
try.
You got to do it.
No, but that's so cool that you were able to do that. Um, and so I think I know that I'm jumping ahead here quite a bit, but obviously you've worked on a bunch of different projects and a bunch of different shows, created more shows, etc. Um, Something kind of random that I'm curious about, but in the past couple of years, you've also started talking a lot to parents. Through your books, multiple books. I think you just came out with a new one in the last couple months. Through social media. What inspired that?
Oh, so many things. One is I do talk to kids for a living through my writing, and it was wonderful to turn it around and talk to adults. It was just an interesting muscle, right, to start writing in
Sure.
that way. But I also spend a lot of time answering questions over the, I want to say, a million years that I've been doing this, about should I feel guilty to let my kids watch TV? Should I feel guilty for the
Mm-hmm.
amount of media my kid watches? And so I've been constantly talking about the merits of good educational content and a foundation of curriculum, or people who know what they're doing. And you want it to be entertaining and interesting and joyful. But obviously, in my point of view, I want to engage the kids so that they're learning and practicing skills and that they're having fun doing it, that they still want this character on a t-shirt or at a birthday party, but that I feel good when I go to bed at night knowing that what we've done for kids or what we've put out there is better, in my opinion, than anything they could be doing otherwise. If not, we won't put it on the air, right? Like if they could get more
Yeah,
information from being outside. So I just started wanting to talk about that because I do think it's hard to discertain what, um, I'm like thinking if I said the right word. I think it is hard to see through the simplicity of what is kids TV. And so to talk about it and to talk about the why that we do everything that we do, and to be helpful to teachers, to parents, to, just to see if there's anything that I can offer that could be helpful, has been something that I really started to be excited about.
that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense. And what's been the sort of response to all of that from
You know,
from
it's
what?
been,
Yeah.
yeah, it's been really great. I mean, I definitely get from the parent side, I get that information of like, okay, well, what else could my kids watch? What do I do when my kids are getting older? What does this look like in terms of media literacy? And, just really smart, really great questions. And also from a curriculum side for teachers, right? How they could use media in their classroom and surround kids with it so that they're learning when they're not even in there, that we can do what we do supports
Mm-hmm.
what they're doing, right? Daniel Tiger's
Yeah.
been a good example of like strategies. for parents that kids can obviously then use and that parents are holding on to, which has been wonderful. But also, it's been really amazing, like on my TikTok, to find the grown up kids that watched Blue's Clues and what they're like and their questions and their love of the nostalgia side of things. And so the more that I can tell those stories, which it's like, oh my God, I have all these people now who want to hear my stories again, like it's so much fun to talk through that, because it's such a process, as you know, to like throw yourself into something like that. And so to be able to talk about it this many years later, it's been very rewarding.
Totally, totally. And I think that's kind of, exactly the space we try to tap into with this podcast. And I think it's kind of weird because the other day I was, realizing I've sat down with a couple of people on Paw Patrol who I initially sought out to talk about like earlier stuff that they did in the 90s and 2000s. But it was like, how do you interview someone that's worked on such a recent juggernaut without talking about it? You obviously have to talk about it. And in that thought process, I was thinking, well, if we target this at 20 somethings, 30 somethings, people who were watching, popular shows in the 90s and in the early 2000s, a surprising amount of those people are starting to have preschool kids now and toddlers that are
Hmm.
watching what's on now. So those demographics are almost merging in a really interesting
Hmm.
way. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yes, absolutely.
Uh, so here's a big question that I assume may be hard to answer, but or maybe not, because you've created so many successful shows, and I feel like you're always sort of able to tap into what should be next. Um, but are there any gaps in content that you still see in the kids space right now? Like, what would you say is like the next thing that the industry should be tackling?
Oh my God, I wish I knew the answer to that. You know, I tend to do my work more on what are parents asking for, what do kids seem to need. And post COVID, there's a lot of, superwise coming back because kids need help in the pre-literacy, literacy, space. They do, and they
Mm,
still, really love super Y. And so the idea that we can bring that back in a different way, right? Because it's been so many years, is really exciting. Or, mental health is a really big thing. Like I look at it from a thematic standpoint. I do think that everyone wants another Paw Patrol, which is what, heroic, kind of big show. I think Gabby Stylhouse, which, my best friend from, co-creator in Blue's Clues is part of that, is that
yeah,
creator of that show, right? And so like
yeah.
playing, leaning into joy and playfulness and, all of that is huge in what she's been able to do. So I think that it really is running the gamut in terms of who preschoolers are, who kids are, what we need to do for older kids right now, which I think is really important. So they're not growing up so fast, to give them something that's sophisticated and well written and high quality, but potentially literally written for them versus above them. And so
Mm-hmm.
those kinds of things, about that level of responsibility. And I think that we're always looking at the intersection between what's something that you'll think about for many, many years that you'll love, but also, can kind of enrich kids, brains in terms of what it is that they might be needing. And so I can't, so I'm not answering your question directly in terms of what I think the industry needs, because I think our industry is in a little bit of a flux right now.
A little bit.
And trying,
You
you're
could
right,
say.
just a little bit. And we've been there before, and we'll come out of it. But it is that sense of kind of what people want and what the networks need have to like come together. Network streamers, blah blah blah. Like I think all of it has to come together, and it's very separate right now.
Mm-hmm. And do you think maybe that's where, because I'd love to pick your brain a little bit about this too. Do you think maybe that's where sort of this happy space of reboots, twists with new sort of focuses comes up because you've been able to, bring back Blue's Clues for Blue's Clues and You. Um, I feel like, Daniel Tiger is obviously another example of a really successful sort of spin off of Mr. Rogers. And I think I mean, you're behind DN Friends and Oz. I believe you were co-creator on that as well, right?
Creator, yeah.
Creator on that as well. Cool. So that's like that's also taking like a beloved story that maybe sells well because of its familiarity, but giving it like a totally new spin and a lot of sort of new meaning. So do you think that that's kind of like the way or a way that the two sides of it kind of merge?
Yeah, I always say that, and first of all, with Dee and Friends, I definitely had amazing people that developed with me. Keon
Mm-hmm.
Jackson, a halcyon person, so I just want to say. But I do think that there is, I always say there are two audiences. There's one is the network or the streamer that you have to pitch to, right? And you have to get past them. They're the ones looking for the reboots, the trademarks that people will know, the brands, right? So when you go to
Right.
pitch something, right, it's like, okay, I do love The Wizard of Oz. Look, Wicked's coming out as a movie. Da, da, da. Like I love it. And there's many psychological reasons why I love it too, right? In terms of all the personalities in the cast. What would we do if it was an adventure for preschoolers who are way too afraid to watch that movie, original movie? What could we do based on the books, right? So there's definitely a reason, and I can turn myself, into that and space and find the part of the story that I want to write about or I'm excited about. But the first part of that is getting somebody excited to make your show. And so that is by saying everyone knows Oz. The Q score for Oz is huge. Let's lean into that. And similarly with Blue's Clues, I was so ridiculously, Trace and I were ridiculously excited to jump back in because it's our home, it's our family, it's our start. And so thinking about what kids today, what would the update version of that be, was really, really rewarding and really fun. But yes, it's not lost on us that the nostalgia is there, and that,
No, totally.
Steve, right? Steve doing a video that goes crazy viral, of course would happen,
Yep,
right? So
yep, yep.
so it's the two audiences. And again, make sure I always say we have to make sure we're making a show that kids will like, but we have to pitch a show that the networks or the streamers will want.
That is a fine line, but you seem to walk it well. So, um,
Sometimes.
no, that's awesome. That's awesome. I see that we are coming up on our half hour mark, but I am so grateful just for your time and for all your insights and everything that you shared and just for the opportunity to have you on the show. So thank you so much.
No, of course. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Cartoon Creators. We would love if you connected with us on one of our social media channels. Have a comment, question, or an idea for a guest we should bring on to the pod? Email us at info@cartooncreators.com. Both words starting with a K, of course.